welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here. I'm Danica. I'm a board member and a volunteer for Horizon Ottawa. So I'm just going to do kind of a pre-welcome before we get to the panel. And so welcome, we're so happy you're here. We're really excited to get going. Horizon, just a very quick overview. Horizon is a young organization. We've only existed about a year before the pandemic. And then of course, there's been tons happening. One of our first campaigns was the Resign Rick campaign, which hasn't completely been successful yet, but we're working on it still. And there's been a ton of work between then and now. And so, of course, the big aim for Horizon Ottawa, which is focused on municipal organizing and getting more progressives elected, is the upcoming municipal election in the fall. So there's been tons of organizing over the last few months, and this is kind of the first official event to kick off our election campaign. And so this is, we wanted to hear from how other cities were able to get progressives elected, learn from their experience to kind of bolster our campaign. So thank you so much for the panelists for being here. I'm very excited to hear what we'll be able to talk about tonight. And also always a pitch. We're always looking for more volunteers, and we're trying to build a very large team to help candidates. So of course we'll be endorsing. We're in the process of seeing who we want to endorse as an organization, and then whoever we endorse, we will support, of course, afterwards, which in part means encouraging volunteers to go help out on those campaigns. And so we're always looking to build, and we'll be offering training to both candidates and volunteers in the next few months. And the last thing I'll say is we're a small organization, like democratically run organization, and we always need funds to be able to organize events and to be able to, publicize things and buy the materials and all of that stuff, and pay for like websites, and all of those pieces cost something. So I'm just going to drop the donate link in the chat. And with that, I will pass it to our lovely Horizon volunteer, Sharon, who offered to help us moderate this event tonight.
Yes, and don't forget local Spotify DJ. For all of you who loved my tunes, please follow my SoundCloud. Haven't made it yet, but once I do, you'll be all the first to hear about it. Welcome today. I'm really excited about this panel. And I'll tell you a little bit about who we have on board today, but I also just wanted to invite you all to kind of come into this space knowing that you don't have to know everything about campaigning in Ottawa or how to support those who are campaigning in Ottawa. Really, I think the only prerequisite today, and maybe I'm stepping on the toes of the panelists, is to sort of want a city that works for everyone and want a city you can be proud of. And I think that's half the battle. But you did not come here to hear me speak about my campaigning, which is zero, my campaigning experience. So I'll tell you about these folks. So today we have Tria Donaldson from Regina. So Tria is an activist, a community builder, and a communications expert currently working at CUPE. She managed her first municipal campaign in 2005, and most recently led a successful coalition effort to elect progressive city councillors and school board trustees across Saskatchewan. Through her work with CUPE and the CLC, she was able to elect a record number of Labour endorsed candidates across the province and successfully flip the balance of power on City Council in Regina, which I think is exactly what we're trying to do if it's not. And Trina is a passionate champion of racial equality and is proud of her Mohawk, Punjabi, and European roots. Then we have James Coccola. James has been working on progressive local election campaigns for more than a decade. In 2014, he was the campaign manager for a successful Victoria City Council candidate. After this experience, he worked with activists to build an organization called Together Victoria, with the goal of helping to coordinate progressive resources in the city. And in 2018, he co-managed Together Victoria's successful campaign, which resulted in 3 new candidates getting elected to council. James is currently an executive vice president for the BC General Employees Union. We also have Cara Ng, my apologies, from Vancouver. Cara is co-chair of the organizing committee of OneCity Vancouver, a progressive municipal party in the city of Vancouver. Founded in 2014, OneCity has one elected councillor and one elected school board trustee, and they're currently laying the groundwork for more wins in October 2022, so we've got that in common. And are running several candidates for council, school board, and park board. At her day job, she is a senior researcher at the BC Centre on Substance Use, my apologies. And last but not least, we have Lisa Brody Hoffman, my apologies. I'm going to be saying that a lot today, so if you have a limited apologies, please go find some more. So Lisa is from Toronto and is a creative director, designer, and progressive political organizer who has designed and led issue-based and political campaigns for over a decade. In 2018, she was the campaign manager to successfully re-elect Toronto City Council Kristen Wong-Tam during the Premier's slashing of City Council in half. She was the lead organizer of Women Win Toronto, a training program for progressive women candidates to run for office, and has worked as chief of staff and director of community outreach at the municipal level in downtown Toronto. Lisa's currently working to advance reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people at Gord Downey and Chenny Wenjack Fend. You can find her work at lisabrodyhoffman.com. All right. And before we jump into the questions and the speakers that you've all been, waiting to hear and just have been getting nothing but me, I just wanted to recognize here before we get started tonight, especially because of what we're talking about. We're talking about radically changing a city. We are talking about, when we talk about municipal election, we're talking about placemaking. We're talking about making a city that works for everyone, including the most marginalized. And so we can't have that conversation without speaking about the fact that Ottawa is on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. And the way we show up to be allies to Indigenous folks looks different for everyone. For myself, that means showing up monetarily, showing up physically when called on, but it also means being really practical about the fact that this is unceded and unsurrendered territory, which means the end goal for me as an ally when I show up to these things is land back. So I'm going to end there. Okay, so we're going to kick right into it. And I'm going to start with Lisa. Lisa, we'd love to hear from you about what it looks like to be engaged in different ways during a campaign season or during a campaign year like we are in. And I'm asking this specifically because I imagine out of the 90 some odd people who are here, there's some folks here who are ready to hit the ground running, do the absolute most, make this their top priority for the next X amount of months. And then there's some folks on the other side of the spectrum who want to support the city in going in a direction that they're proud of, but are saying, I have X amount of time, X amount of resources, and X amount of capacity. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what it looks like to participate and be engaged across the spectrum and what that can look like for every single person here.
Thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks for the warm welcome and great introduction. I'm actually going to turn to everyone here, and if you'd like to raise your hand, I'd just like to know who's participated on a political campaign before. And I have this lovely view of all of you. Okay, so we have some folks who have gone door to door, maybe made phone calls for a local candidate, maybe even been on an election planning committee. And maybe even have run yourself. Has anyone here even run for council or is planning to run? And you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, but I'm just curious. Okay, wow, so we have a real range of folks here. That's really great. So I think that there are so many ways to get involved. And one of the things that in our pre kind of conversations around this panel that we spoke about was really asking the question of why. So I'll talk a little bit about the why and a little bit about ways to get involved. So campaigns are really at a ground level, especially in the municipal context where it's really where the rubber hits the road. Municipalities deliver your services, everything from snow clearing to garbage pickup, to parks and recreation programs and all the really local amenities that are accessible to you are delivered by your municipality. So ways to get involved on political campaigns often come from folks who care about specific issues, but also entry points for people who may not have been civically engaged in prior and are looking for a way to get involved. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why folks get involved at a local level. And it's everything from, caring about those issues to wanting to just make some new friends and meet people who are outside of their circle. And I think that range of why is really valid. Now to the question of various ways to get involved, political campaign experts will tell you, a lot of it is just talking to voters, right? So whether it's signing up for one canvas shift that's 1 hour in the evening after work, just being able to give more time talking to voters, going door to door, or phone banking, calling voters on the phone. The real bricks and mortar of a campaign is identifying your supporters and making sure that they vote on election day, and providing really important information on how to do that, where to vote, how to vote, what you need to vote. But then as you continue on that journey and you find yourself bitten by the bug of political campaigning, which I'm sure many of us are, and really coming from a place of the belief in building a better city. And for me, that's Toronto, and I'm originally from Montreal. And for you folks, that's Ottawa, building a better and more progressive city. You start to potentially be able to give more time. And even if you're have seasoned experience and not a lot of time, you can join on a committee of a campaign. You can become part of your local election planning committee. But I think at the base of it, a lot of it is just talking to voters. Sometimes folks enter political campaigns and they want to manage social media. That is something that needs to be done, but it's, communications is really about going door to door and talking to voters and building ground game support. So that's my 2 cents to open up the panel, and I look forward to other panelists jumping in.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm sure other people, other members of the panel will have something to say here, but from yourselves or anyone else, just as a follow-up, I'm curious to know 2 things. One, I think it can't go without saying that one way that folks get involved is money. If you don't have the time, you're like, it's going to be a hectic couple of months for me, but I can donate. Just wondering how far that can go. And also for any of the panelists, Lisa included, just wondering about what it looks like to get involved in a riding that's not yours. Can you split your time across the board to multiple candidates, across the city? Is that something that's normal and usual and encouraged?
My 2 cents on that, because I'm in a very dense urban city, is that people leave their neighborhoods. And this idea that, and the neighborhood I'm in is Toronto Centre. It's geographically quite small. And I think that there's a lot of great reasons to campaign outside of that, whether it's a candidate that you really believe in, whether it's an issue, where there's a local issue where that exists, or where, your friends and family are also, like, I think people move various places. And also there's the question of running outside your neighborhood. I know that's can be a little bit contentious of a question, but I also, in a downtown, densely urban neighborhood, like city, I think that we leave our neighborhoods and it's totally fine to run in a place that you don't live.
You heard it from Lisa. If anyone questions you, just go back to Lisa Brody Hoffman.
I will say that it does become very contentious on the political campaign trail.
All right, if it's okay, I don't know, James, you look like you've been jumping in there, but I wonder if I can go and ask Tria where she's at with this, about what it looks like to be engaged across the board, and if anyone else wants to jump in as well.
Yeah. So just thanks for having me. I'm in Regina on Treaty 4 territory. And I think one of the best things about campaigning outside of your area is that a lot of times like progressives are concentrated in certain neighborhoods, and it's so good to get out of our bubble and talk to folks that aren't necessarily thinking the same as us and kind of see what the issues are around in different neighborhoods. So it's always fun to go door knock in a new neighborhood. And I'm slowly making my way and have like door knocked in pretty much every parts of my city. And obviously it's like not as big as Toronto. But it's still interesting, like the differences you get in different communities. I think the other piece I just really want to mention around how people get involved and why people get involved is that municipally, the politics touch our lives so much. And I recently ran federally, and it was amazing to me, like how much when I ran federally, the issues people were talking about were actually municipal. So whether that's like, you know, snow clearing, like you talked about, that's one of the biggest issues in Regina where I live, roads, potholes, city parks, affordable housing, climate change, like all of these things, our municipalities have so much room to improve the lives of folks in, and people don't necessarily realize it. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about levels of government and like what folks do. And municipally, folks don't really get involved. So there's a huge opportunity in terms of turning out progressive voters. And that's what we found in our election too, is like the folks that really showed up won the day. So if you can really, you know, motivate folks to get out, you can have make a huge difference in municipal politics. And so some of that goes down to funding and making sure that our progressive campaigns are well funded and can run a good campaign, but also all of like that's helping, and also making sure you're not all running in the same ward. So I think that kind of speaks to the need to, you know, spread out and like be in different areas of the city, because if you have everyone running for like the core parts of the town, like you're not going to be able to win a progressive majority.
Oh yeah, please go ahead, Cara.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to speak to the question of why get involved. And to me, that is both a very personal and collective question, because, you know, every time I participate and get involved in politics, I feel like it does pull me out of the brink of despair, which I think a lot of us are feeling, particularly through the pandemic, where we've kind of retreated into our silos. And I think that, you know, certainly social media and the polarizations that social media tends to create doesn't help either. So yeah, I did want to say that from like a mental wellness perspective, from a mental well-being perspective, I know that it's just kept me sane and on the ground, because I'm actually working for concrete solutions to build a better world. And I certainly think that that is something that is echoed a lot by my peers. So I just wanted to say that about why get involved. It's so important for just the mental well-being of ourselves and our communities.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's so funny that you used a moment of despair, because I think for a lot of us, that's what the last like 2 years have felt like. And, you know, as much as elections can be a little bit stressful, they can feel like this moment of transition. In this moment, after 2 years, this can also be like, okay, what is this shift going to be to give us that hope? How are we going to get out on the other side of this with a lot of collective joy and pride in what we've accomplished together? So I absolutely love that. So after hearing this, I'm sure you're now all convinced that this is the place to be on your Thursday night. So if you're now finally convinced that you made the right call and you want to tweet this live tweet as you're here tonight, please use the hashtag #WinTheCity on Twitter. And also, if you are watching through Facebook Live, please feel free to post comments on questions. We'll try and get to them. And if you're here, not on Facebook Live, you can also throw your comments or questions on the chat, and I will try and get to them. I also might forget the chat exists. So the Horizon team will hopefully be a lot more useful than I am there. Okay, so let's jump, let's shift gears a little bit. We still want to be hopeful, but let's also be, you know, let's talk about the fact that in an election, there are multiple sides to multiple things, and we're not all going to be harmoniously aligned. So I'm curious to know, Cara, how would you recommend creating messaging and just talking, like, there was a lot of talk, especially from Lisa, about communication being a really key aspect of, you know, well-run campaigns. So how can we create messaging? How can we talk about where we want to go and the things we want to do, specifically as individuals, as folks who are running campaigns, in a way that won't alienate other folks who might share that kind of progressive, progressive bucket that we're all in, but are, we might have different definitions of progressive, or one person might have an issue that's top of mind for them that maybe is, number 3 on my list. So how can we create messaging that doesn't alienate, but also lifts up everyone's, sort of core concerns and core needs?
So that is such a good question. It's something that our team is constantly thinking about because it's such an important one. So the thing is that there is a world of people who don't think like us, or talk like us, or listen to the same music as us, or who read the same books as us. What is it that we need to do to win them over to our side? So some of the questions that we often consider in our campaign is, does our message get out to voters who don't speak English fluently, who are from working class backgrounds and don't have a university degree, who aren't well-versed in, the most up-to-date progressive language? So my concern is that if we are too insular in the way we talk to people, we risk losing them, and we risk not reaching the people we need to change the world. One thing I found helpful in organizing is avoiding the use of let's say, moralistic language, which presumes that there are good people and there are bad people. Because the arguments that ultimately win out are the ones that make the case to people that they too will benefit. They will benefit socially, they'll benefit materially and politically from our vision of a more just future. So instead of framing a solution to a problem as one where there are winners and losers, I think the goal should be to frame our solution as something where everyone stands to gain and to flourish. So I'm going to give you one brief example, which is around the housing crisis, which is often all-encompassing in civic politics. So in disagreements around housing, I'm sure you all know that you'll often come across, single detached homeowners who oppose zoning changes in their neighborhood that allow for more affordable housing choices. So I would say that instead of making the argument right out of the gate that they're NIMBYs, that is not in my backyard, which will likely make them immediately defensive because those terms are already so loaded, I think it's important to do everything we can to disarm them. Make the case that it offers them the option of downsizing. Make the case that it'll keep their friends and family in the city instead of having them be pushed out by rising rental and housing costs. I think there is a way to communicate a message that resonates with a broad base of voters that appeals to both people's sense of kindness and compassion, but also reassures them that your version of the city will lift them up as well. And of course, sometimes these appeals don't work. People are too stuck in their ways. They benefit from the status quo. So there will be adversaries, but that's a natural part of the struggle. The point that I'm trying to make is that we need to lead with an openness and kindness and trust in people's ability to evolve. So that is my take on that question.
I have to say that I would love the world to be more views. I wouldn't mind a whole lot more views. I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think if we can shift it over to specifically the context that we're in Ottawa, and James, I'd love to hear from you next. Right now, when you talk about that sort of strong amount of divide in the city, be it whether Ottawa is going to follow along with the province just next week or the week after around mandates for COVID, whether it's the LRT, whether it's something that has come into front and center in the last few months in a way none of us not hoped for, but didn't anticipate, like defunding the police. We have really big things to think about right now, and big ways to figure out how do we reach across, how do we talk about these things without alienating others, in the way that you said, it's good for all of us. It's not a matter of you're a good person, you're a bad person. I'm curious to hear from you, James, about what you think that might look like for us in Ottawa.
Well, I think there's a really big difference between elections at the local level in Ottawa versus us on the West Coast, and that's you have a ward system. And so you're not running one election, you're running 24 elections plus a mayoral election. It's a big difference that has weaknesses, but also has strengths. So you don't have to run the same campaign in every ward. A good campaign is going to take the knowledge that you have as community activists and volunteers, and you're going to use that to craft your messaging that's going to be tailored to the specific part of the city that you're in. We would use the term ballot question a lot of the time to talk about messaging. And what that is a term that says, when a voter goes to the polls, what are they going to be voting on? What is the issue that's going to drive them to cast their vote? So in my context, and probably a lot of folks' context, our ballot question in 2018 was housing. And so we created our messaging around housing, and we tried to make it as broad and inclusive as possible, while still kind of being grounded in a core progressive politics. And we see that on the other side of the fence as well, with the folks who necessarily we don't align with politically. They'll also have a ballot question. Their ballot question, you can tell, because it'll be often things like public safety. And so, the trick here is find your ballot question in your area. You want to find one that's going to be broad enough that it'll get you a winning coalition, but also one that's going to be personal and will resonate with people, so that they say, hey, this is something I really care about and really want to vote for.
Yeah, I love that. And Cheryl, I'll let you in here for a minute, because I'd also love to hear about from both you and Lisa. Everything you said is fantastic. Everything Cara and James has said is fantastic. But we've been talking a lot about people who are already going to the polls. Now I'm curious about people who are not. So for instance, I've shouted this from the rooftop. This is the first municipal election I'll be able to vote in, because I just got my citizenship. And I know that I am a little bit of an anomaly, because for a lot of new immigrants, once they can vote, they just don't. Either because no one's really talking to them, or they just don't understand. They haven't been deep in those like contexts. Maybe they're not in the Horizon chats or anything of that nature. And so what about the folks who just aren't coming? They don't see themselves in the council as it is. So right now, I think it's, what was it when Councillor King was elected? I think for a few years ago, first Black councillor in a city that has a huge population of Black folks. So, might not be that interesting to them. And we're also federally a pretty, important city. So a lot of people might be looking at federal elections, not so much municipal. So I'd love to hear from you about, messaging that feels right for people, that isn't alienating them, not just for the folks who are already intending to go to the ballots, but those who are going to have to coax in a little bit. So Lisa and Tria, and I think Tria, you're already ready to go.
Yeah, so I think a couple points, and your question kind of veers me off in another direction. But before I kind of start, just on James's talk about messaging, you also need to remember the bread and butter issues that people will care about municipally. So if you're not talking about the roads, or that noisy highway, or the fact that the one neighborhood wants a stop sign, there's so much of that stuff in municipal politics that we really just can't forget. And I had an amazing council candidate I worked with, who's now an amazing counselor. And whenever she'd come up with that one small group of people that were upset about their intersection or their road, she would get them to start a petition in the neighborhood. And so she was actually able to activate those little small groups of people that cared about that specific 2-block radius around that school thing, and got them to be more involved and active. And that, I think that's just a great way of doing that, because you're not going to know all those issues until you go door knocking, and until you're talking to folks in the community. But being able to empower them, I think, is huge. So that's one thing I really liked seeing. And then the other piece around getting people out to vote. Like the representation thing's huge. Like we've never had an Indigenous councillor elected in Regina, and we have a huge Indigenous population. Huge issue. We're working to rectify that, hopefully next time. But a lot of it is, that connecting with people with the issues that are closest to them. And the one plug I also want to mention is like, are you guys also having school board elections at the same time, or like any other like park board type stuff? Like we often forget about that, but in Regina, it was actually the school board elections that had way more attention, because there was issues around the former school board being run by right-wing Christians that were trying to like outlaw mentions of pride in schools. So that was a huge entry point for folks from the queer community getting involved with municipal politics. So we had like a huge effort from folks in those community get out around school board issues that also had a benefit on our city council. So I think you also need to think about building alliances with other folks that are running. So in Regina, we have the public school board and we also have the Catholic school board. So in a lot of areas, we are also able to have that cooperation between the school board candidate and the municipal candidate, which allowed them to go door knocking together and like increase their reach into communities. Cause like some people knew, certain people and other people knew different people. And then you're also like widening your net, I think. So the more different issues you can talk about, like, yes, it's super important to have one issue, like housing that you're talking about, but like, there's specific people that only want to care about heritage issues in communities or want to talk about recreation, like all of these different pieces of municipal politics, like being able to have policies that speak to people and like, a clear way to get them engaged and getting their communities out to vote too is really key.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Lisa, go ahead. You've been looking at me like, let me in, coach. So come on, come into the ring.
No, what everyone's saying is just so spot on. I have 2 points. One that's towards the how to engage folks that don't vote. But to Tria's point is like, you can win a poll on your stance on a stop sign. And I think that it is really like neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block. And what's really important in building messaging, to bring back to your question, that can reach across various divides, is really attaching these local, stop sign, dog off leash park areas, one street that has a lot of potholes, tying that to a larger vision that's positive, and talking about, like when someone complains about a stop sign, they're complaining about how they feel unsafe, right? And their kids may be unsafe. So it's tying that to like a safe city, a walkable city, a bikeable city. I mean, bikeable, we all know where that urban, rural thing can, yeah. But it's really tying that to a positive and holistic vision that ties all the municipal services together, so that you're not talking about the stop sign, but you're talking about what people care about in their hearts. The second point, I think, is a really great one. Your second question, not my point, my point is whatever, but where democracy actually can take place for folks that are new to Canada, new voters who are infrequent, or new voters in general, is that it happens in places that are rooted in communities. So community centers, it happens at libraries, it happens in like places where everyday people gather, and you can have opportunity to talk about how easy it is to vote. And I think that, there's some great work coming out of the Democratic Engagement Exchange out of Ryerson here in Toronto about engaging new and infrequent voters, and really not coming at it with a partisanship or even like coming at it with your opinions on issues, but really asking what matters to you, and then tying that to voting, and then explaining that voting is easy and it's fast and it's fun, right? Like that people want to do something that's fun and it feels good. And that's slightly different than being like, you don't vote because you don't care about the issues in your neighborhood. No, maybe they don't know how to vote. Maybe it's intimidating. Maybe they got a card in the mail and it's like, they don't know where they need to go and it's different than last time. So that's like really kind of in the mix for me, and how to engage new voters.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. I mean, I've always found it interesting being in Canada, from where I'm from originally. Voting Day is a national holiday. So I've always found it interesting that people have to say things, I have to leave work. But I hear you. And also, this has been a natural progression into tactics. You've talked about tactics to get folks to the poll. You've talked about tactics to get, someone who is just like, this is my one thing. I just need that one stop sign. Everything else could care less, like how to reach them. So, and I'm sure everyone here is thrilled to get into that tactical conversation. So I'd love to hear, both in your experience, these little tactics, both the really like exciting ones and also the ones that are not that sexy, but they work really well. What tactics do you think we should be thinking about employing this year? What's gotten you excited and what worked in a way that you just were super surprised about? And I think we can throw that over to, actually, if anyone is thrilled about jumping in there. Oh, okay, go for it, Cara. It's gonna go, James. It's all yours.
Oh, is there, if James, you'd like to go?
No. It's
sure?
all yours.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Yeah, Cara, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So what I was thinking about when we're just talking about pulling in new voters is the fact that the left should not surrender the fun or less serious issues to the right or to the center. I think we need to really cover that ground well. So I'll give you an example of what OneCity did very well a few years ago. So I think in 2017 or 2018, we came out with a petition to legalize drinking in parks. And it was an incredibly popular petition. I would say probably our most popular petition to date. And there were some progressives who thought of it, as a waste of time, completely disconnected from the issues like the housing crisis that impact us on a day-to-day basis. But I think that the petition was good for a wide range of reasons. Not only was it very effective at list building, it meant that, again, we weren't surrendering fun or less serious issues to other parties. And while superficially legalizing drinking in parks doesn't seem like a particularly deep or systemic issue, I would argue that it definitely has equity considerations. So most Vancouverites can't afford to buy or rent a place with a backyard. Why should those who can afford it be the only ones to be able to enjoy an alcoholic beverage in an outdoor setting? Furthermore, what we also know is that ticketing can disproportionately target poor and racialized communities, and that legalizing drinking in parks, while not the entire solution, could go some way towards remedying this problem. So, that part is a way for me to emphasize both the importance of foregrounding fun and seemingly less serious issues in politics, but sometimes these issues are connected to a whole host of equity-related issues.
I love that. I love that. And if you're using the hashtag on Twitter, and I would ask if you are using the hashtag, since we're talking about equity issues, when you use the hashtag capitalize, okay, there we are. Capitalize the W, the T, and the C, so that screen readers can get that hashtag. And if you've got a good tweet on your hands, which is, park drinking is an equity issue, it's Ottawa 2022. Okay, who else would like to jump in here?
I'll jump in. So one of the best tactics we utilized in 2018 was targeting renters. And so what we were trying to do is we were trying to ask the question, who do we think are in our universe of potential voters? Who do you think are going to vote for us? Well, likely folks who are more housing insecure are probably going to vote for groups of people who are talking about housing security. But we also know that folks in those situations are less likely to vote because they face systemic barriers. We talked to a lot of people at the door who didn't know they could vote because they thought renters couldn't. They didn't know where the polling was. They just moved a couple of weeks ago. They weren't sure if they're allowed to. And so we did a mapping exercise where we mapped out all of the rental buildings in the city, specifically the older ones, which was key because they're not locked between floors. And then we canvassed those buildings with targeted materials speaking directly to those voters. So it's about making the ask or the conversation as personal as possible to the people who we're trying to reach. And every time you talk to somebody at the door, and this is why canvassing is so important, every time you talk to somebody at the door, their likelihood of actually going out and voting goes up by about, some studies will say about 7%. So it actually makes a really big difference when you go out and talk to people who are more likely to have barriers. It makes them more likely to come out and actually cast a ballot. So it was really worth our time. We got a significant number of our marks being identified supporters through this tactic.
That's fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, Tria.
I just want to jump in there when James is talking about marks, because my co-organizer for Municipal, Deanna Ogle, who's participating tonight, would kill me if I didn't mention making sure that you're getting good data. Because like a key to like actually running a election campaign is not just talking to folks, but it's making sure that you're identifying them, getting their contact info so you can follow up with them, and making sure they get to the polls. So some of that back end stuff is the most important. So making sure that you have a good database set up, that you have folks that are kind of, you know, managing that piece, and that's all also kind of getting into your get out the vote piece is like super important tactically. And then I also just think like James's point about like having specific issues you're talking about in rental units, like that's the huge benefit of a ward system, because like you can run folks that are like, you know, 10 campaigns that are tangibly like connected, but each kind of have their own messaging and framing to the community they're in. And so like in rental heavy neighborhoods, that might be one issue. And in suburban issues, like I've been looking at the chat and there's like, you know, lots of stuff about sprawl and issues like that and services. And so like, you know, it's different campaigns and different messaging, but knowing your audience is like super important.
I'm going to jump on that and just say yes to great data. Like data can be the foundation of your entire campaign strategy. Going door to door allows you to figure out messaging and then get it to a wider audience at a very local sphere. There's nothing like having that good data, like getting those marks and pulling your vote on election day or on advanced polls.
Okay, well, I have you here, Lisa. Do you want to talk a little bit about tactics too? Anything that you love, that you would love to see Ottawa test out? Maybe something you've always wanted to do, and because you have no worries of being pointed out for this. So what crazy things should we be doing over here in Ottawa?
I mean, I don't think anything's, I think people are just really hungry to reconnect, honestly. And maybe that's a superficial answer to like what could be a very tactical, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things to do. I think people just want to feel like they exist in a neighborhood, that they can smile at the people that they walk by, and that, you know, there's champions out there who are going to continue advancing progressive city building, well, not city building, but like, you know, city placemaking. Yeah, and just like gathering. It's really, I think it's a season of gathering. So I would say do a lot of that. And then go canvas.
Yeah, and I just saw on a note, like, where do you get your data from? And I don't know what it's like in Ottawa, but usually we have to build from the ground up. So part of it's like not getting rid of data from last campaigns, trying to scrunch together things from previous campaigns, from petitions. Sometimes you can get lists from labor organizations of their members in communities. I know QP will sometimes provide that. Sometimes you get like slipped a list that you shouldn't have from other campaigns. So I know that like I have like not gotten a jump drive with like sign locations from previous campaigns. That's never happened, but sometimes things like that happen. But like you municipally, I don't know what it's like there, but we don't have a voters list. So we just have to kind of start from zero for a lot of stuff. But petitions and all that kind of stuff is great. And making sure you're keeping track of things when you're kind of going through is really important.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just
here's a tactic. You can go in an election and take pictures of sign locations for progressive candidates, and then do a targeted communications in the next election for those sign locations.
Look at that, coming in hot with the big ideas. But also let me plug here that just to say disaggregated data for me is always the best kind of data. So if you're going to be in that space, that's something you should consider. Cara, we haven't heard from you around tactics.
One thing that comes to mind, and I know that it's, the least sexy way of reaching people, but honestly, it's door-to-door knocking. And I personally love door-to-door knocking. It's something that really builds connections with community and makes you feel less alone. It also really strengthens your communication skills and try to meet people where they're at. And actually there's I don't know, you're probably all familiar with Jane McAlevey. She's a very well-respected labor organizer in the United States. And she makes the distinction, and this is a distinction that I feel is very helpful between organizing and activism. And so she defines activism as talking at people and making judgments about them, and kind of approaching people with a ready-made script. And she thinks of organizing as, a lot more rigorous, thorough work. And what it does is it involves speaking to those who aren't already on your side, who don't already agree with you, or perhaps who think they don't agree with you. So this is one of the hallmarks of great unionizing too, is the capacity to speak to people outside of our silos and to build the coalition we need to secure dignified conditions for everyone. So speaking to people who might not use the same political language that we do, or have the same aesthetic taste, I think that is key to building a movement, and door knocking is the most effective way to do that. And I actually recommend it to most everyone if you can, because it is a highly invigorating, reaffirming experience to do that.
Okay, that's really lovely. I love that. I love that.
Followed closely by also making sure you're at community events and like in areas that are hard to get into, standing inside of like busy intersections with petitions and signs is also great. But door knocking is the best.
Sharon, can I just kind of ask, maybe we can think about this question a little bit differently, and we've talked a lot about tactics in terms of like, what are we doing on the campaign, but like, what is a tactic right now Horizon Ottawa should be doing? Like, for example, I think that, the best thing that you folks can be doing right now is making sure that you're roping in all of your friends and family to become volunteers in a couple of months, building out your networks, and, making sure that when the election actually comes and you're ready to go and you're going to knock on doors, there's 100 of you. Because as soon as you're at the election itself and there's only 10 of you, it's going to be really, really hard to step up your game at that point. But I'm wondering if anybody might have suggestions on how to build out those volunteer bases.
I am not a panelist, but I will say now, this is very validating, because folks, if you're here today, this is a good sign, because this is the first of a series of sessions we'll be doing similar to this. And towards the end of today, we'll put out a link to sign up if you want to volunteer at any capacity. The link will send you to a form where you kind of figure out what kind of volunteering you want to do, whether it is the door knocking, whether it is community events. And so towards the end of this session tonight, if you can go ahead and fill that list, that would be fantastic. Share it with your friends, share it with folks in your neighborhood. So I promise I didn't ask James to say that. This is just beautiful. Go ahead, Lisa.
I love that. And sometimes it's even great to add a target. So it's like recruit 5 friends. And then from there, you actually have a number you're working with.
Well, you heard it from here, folks. Recruit 5 friends. So that form. But you are right. And I think this is exactly what we're trying to do here, is we technically are not in election, like this campaigning has not begun. And so this time between now and then, this is that time to get prepared and to build up our numbers and to be clear about our messaging. So absolutely, James, hard agree. Okay, so actually, I think this is a great segue into this question. For those who are new to municipal election campaigning, I saw what was like 20 something hands that went up. So maybe there are a good chunk of people who aren't, about a quarter of the folks here aren't new to campaigning. Can you tell us a little bit about what to expect, both now, you know, as we're still in that calm before the storm, and when we're in the thick of things. And that's whether you are running an election, maybe for the first time as a candidate, or you're doing some of that door knocking. What should folks expect? And I'll even add here, just to spice it up a little bit, what should you keep in mind? Because I, for instance, I'll say for myself, you know, after the convoy a few weeks ago, after a pandemic, this is a bit of a different space where, you know, someone, let's say, who looks like me might be a little bit you know, concerned about doing things like door knocking. I'm a little scared. I saw more swastikas in the last month than I would like to have seen in my life. And so what does that translate like to what campaigning can actually look like for everyone across the board? So I will throw this to Tria first, if that's okay.
So I think what it looks like, what a municipal campaign looks like, depends on whether or not you're the candidate or not. And so if folks are thinking about running, like I know I see Ariel, who I know is running, there might be some other folks on the chat. But it's my first time running was this fall federally, and it's wild. Like it's wild. But just make sure you have a good support team. I think that's like one of the biggest pieces, is making sure that if you're running, you have a team of people that is supporting not just like your campaign, but your mental health and like your well-being. And for anyone who's like seriously wanting to get really involved, is get some good shoes. If you're doing a lot of door knocking, I cannot overestimate the importance of good footwear. The other thing, like with the municipalities, is like, a lot of times, especially with everything that's going on, like there's lots of people that aren't going to know there's even an election happening. So like, I think sometimes, like if you're living and breathing politics, it's easy to forget like how little people care about municipal politics a lot of time. Like I even have like my friends that are like, you know, really involved with other levels of politics, being like, why should I care about municipal politics? So like, you know, I think it'll be interesting, because I think you guys are in a really unique place, because there has been so much conversations about the mayor, and when there's a mayoral race, there's always more interest in what's happening municipally. So I think like how you are kind of working in between like the mayoral campaign that's going to get a lot of attention, and how that kind of funnels down into council and school board elections is like interesting. But yeah, can't believe it took that. Boo, Jim Watson. But like that's going to create like a little more interest. But yeah, just don't forget that a lot of people aren't going to care. So the first barrier is like to making sure that people know that there's an election and they can vote, and that their vote matters. And from there, it'll be an interesting ride for you guys. I'm excited to watch.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Go ahead. It's all yours. Thank you, Tria. My apologies.
Yeah, I can go. I think that one thing that when I first started volunteering on political campaigns, that during the writ period or during the election period, was how fast everything took place at the office. So like, if you have not gone to a campaign office in the middle of a campaign, get ready to potentially just like have a clipboard shoved into your hands and told to go to a certain place. And that's not because people don't care. It's because the speed of political campaigns are just so fast. Yeah, I think that's one thing.
Okay, thanks so much. James and Cara, what should we be expecting if this is your first go at campaigning in any capacity? You both look scared, like you should be like, don't do it.
It's not on the positive side. I think, it's all positive because they're all making change. But you know, one of the things I like most about campaigning, and what I got the most out of being involved with campaigns, was meeting new folks and making friends. And it can be a really social experience. And a good campaign will feel like you want to go back because you're excited. You're excited the people you meet, you're excited the people you talk to. So on that, if you're not feeling excited, talk to the people who are there and see if there's another role that you can take on. So if door knocking is not for you, maybe there's phone calling. I hate phone calling, but some people love it. Check in with the people who are there, find a place for you to fit. And if you're running the campaign, find ways of making it social for people. So we would do like Friday drinks after a canvass, or like a fun little prize thing every once in a while to help people like connect, because especially now, it's such an important part of what we do. If we're not having fun, if we're not meeting new people, folks are going to want to come back. So
Okay.
I hope you all have a great time doing it.
I love that. I love it. So you heard it first. If you lost your friend group during the pandemic, or you're single, ready to mingle, this is the place for you. Campaigning, not Tinder. That's my election slogan. Go ahead, Cara.
My first date with my husband was door knocking.
Yeah,
So.
listen.
My wife was my other campaign manager.
You know what? Forget wanting a new city. Do you want a partner? Here's where you should be. Win the city and find love too. Yes, Melissa. Go ahead, Cara.
This conversation is also making me think of like opportunities to, I guess, upgrade your skills. So in our organization, we have a membership secretary who onboards new members and figures out what they want to do and what they want to improve upon. And so what we found is really helpful is partnering people with somebody else who has more experience in the area that they want to improve upon. So it becomes kind of a win-win situation. And yeah, so I think that is a particularly good opportunity that can happen during municipal campaigns is, improving upon the skill sets that you'd like to improve upon.
Yeah, I love that. And that also becomes like, oh no, Lisa, go for it.
I'm going to counter my point where it's like, if you are running or on an organizing committee of a campaign, treat your volunteers really, really well. Get to know them, know what they want and like to do, know why they're coming out, and really take the time. Like, I think one of the most important pieces of a campaign, other than data, is your volunteer coordinator. So you want that person to be, there's a lot of calling volunteers over and over again, asking them to come out. So you want to have someone in that role who's really going to sit down and take the time at the onset to talk with each and every volunteer. And I know it's a commitment in time, but it's so, so valuable. Yeah.
Okay.
So to counter the clipboard getting shoved in your hand experience.
There's a different way to do this. And there's a different expectation to set. I like that. And if we can see from the chat. Oh, go ahead, Tria.
Sorry, I just want to add like what to expect. There's some people in the chat talking about the timing. Like we just had a federal election. You guys are having provincial election and then municipal. Our last municipal election was 3 weeks after our provincial election. It was our year from hell for our political organizers. But that turned out to be our advantage, like, because we had like specific folks that kind of sat out the provincial election and were ready to hit the ground rolling municipally. And we were way better prepared and ready to go than the right. And I think they were really shocked and surprised. Like none of them saw it coming. Like it was 2 weeks, Deanna. Like she's reminding me, yes, yeah. And both Deanna and I, who coordinated the campaign, worked on provincial campaigns too. So it was just like, go. So you guys have a bit more time than that, which is great. So I'm 100% confident in your ability to kind of deal with that timeline, but it's an advantage.
Yeah.
If you can make sure that your base is motivated more than the other people's bases, then you can really knock one out in a low turnout election.
Awesome. That's why we're here. I was just going to say, if we can see from the chat, the 3 things that motivate people in Ottawa or unite us: Jim Watson, drinking in parks, and politics is dating. So we're doing great, Ottawa. We're doing great. Okay. I want to throw, might be our last question in here. We'll see how we can get through it. And this is a bit of a tricky one, or an exciting one, but thinking about how to manage expectations of the left. So we're all here, everyone has some type of relationship to Horizon Ottawa, so we can all assume that the folks here either think of themselves as lean on the left, leaning to the left, in the left, progressive. But as we said in the beginning, that can look quite different for different people. So just wanted to throw it out there to you. Maybe I'll start with Cara, what that might look like for us.
Let's see. So I guess I can speak to just the question of representation and where it can lead us. So the idea of bringing new voices to the tables of power, that is becoming more and more, coming more and more to the foreground of political conversation. And that is absolutely as it should be. And as you all know, there are still so many barriers to running for political office, and those absolutely must be struck down. And if we are to build a truly democratic society, we have to do that. But I don't think we should end the conversation at, diversity is good, having diverse voices in politics is good. So the next point that I'm making might seem obvious, but I think is important to make, especially for those who are, running left parties and organizations, that is candidates from marginalized groups won't all have progressive politics. Identities don't necessarily confer a particular political perspective. And if we don't elect candidates that fight for the necessary social and material changes that would strike down the barriers to political engagement in the first place, changes could be merely window dressing. Because people arrive at their political beliefs in extremely complex ways. It's what makes us all human. So I think it's important to honor that humanity in people, take the time to get to know them for who they really are. And that needs to be reflected in, for example, candidate searches. Otherwise, recruiting someone solely based on identity and not value and policy alignment or character becomes very tokenizing. That being said, we can also never forget that in addition to the fact that equity-seeking candidates, like racialized candidates, choose not to run because they don't see themselves or relate to those in positions of power, what we also know, but often don't discuss nearly as much as we should, is that there are socioeconomic conditions that prevent people from running for office in the first place, like student debt, barely scraping by because of poverty, lack of childcare. So if we don't address these fundamental underlying issues, we will always have a limited pool of who gets to run for political office. And I think championing diversity in elected office will only take us so far unless we address the material barriers to success for many. So that is often an issue that I think about in terms of the different expectations that happen in my political conversations on the left. Is sometimes there is a tension between representation and material redistribution, and I think we absolutely have to marry both.
Ooh, Cara, you came in hot with that one. That was fantastic. Or I'll say it in a really crass way. Black people like to say not all skin folk are your kinfolk. But that's a much crasser way of saying that. But absolutely, I hear that loud and clear. And again, like when you start pushing just diversity without, like you said, values, without that equity lens, without thinking through what is that person bringing to the table, then it's not great for anyone, because you're starting to rear on tokenizing. Okay, who else wants to jump in here? No pressure, but you're going after Cara.
I'll go, and I'll take this in a different direction. So in Regina, we also have a ward system, and what has happened historically is we'll get all of the progressive running in one ward where everyone lives. So previously, this year was the first year we were able to kind of convince people to run in different areas and actually have folks run in multiple wards. So we had 5 candidates for 11 wards, and there is 2 incumbents we weren't targeting because they were good. They just didn't want to be affiliated with us. And that it makes such a huge difference when your resources aren't pitting against each other. And I know this is something that can happen a lot in progressive circles, but it's shitty. I think one of the ways we were able to do that was through making sure that there was one group providing the training, the resources. We offered a lot to kind of potential candidates in terms of training and support. And from that, was able to kind of do some more coordination so people didn't run against each other, because there was some of that that had to happen. And that's obviously different than if you're running a political system. But I think with Horizon Ottawa, when you're talking about endorsing candidates, some of that jockeying to convince people to run in less ideal seats is really important. So that's like thing one, I think, around like the left not eating itself. And the second piece is really focusing on shared values. Because if we win, right, and if we get a bunch of folks elected, our work doesn't stop. And so being able to have relationships between campaigns too, so that, you know, the candidates can also kind of lean on each other and start to develop those relationships is really key also. So we had like lots of like kind of not mixers because it was the pandemic. So we did like lots of Zoom sessions where people kind of talked how things were going and things like that, just to kind of build those relationships. And now folks kind of have this like core little team, which is like really great for them. And then the second piece is in some of the areas where we didn't win, making sure that we're keeping the list and keeping the capacity, because this isn't just a one and done thing. Like I think all of us are committed to this for life. So that is part of recognizing, even in the areas that we run but don't necessarily win, you're still making gains and you can build on that too. So making sure you're kind of keeping that piece is really important. But yeah, don't run each other against each other. That's my key takeaway.
Solid advice. James or Lisa, want to jump in here?
Sure. I mean, some great advice so far. I really appreciate the comments that have been said. In Victoria, we had a problem where, much like Regina, where there'd be too many people running for the seats available, and sometimes us on the progressive side are too nice to each other, and hard decisions need to be made. And what we did is we said, hey, us as organizers who aren't running, so everybody who's running, cover your ears, we should get together, we should talk about this. And we should only support the ones that we think that we can get elected. And if you're not going to be able to get elected, we need to make sure that you're not taking resources away from people who can get elected. And sometimes it's hard, it's a hard conversation to have. But the end result is we got people elected, and otherwise we might not have been able to. And I'm kind of going back to the question itself of the managing the expectations of the left. What we found, it wasn't actually during the election that it was most difficult. It was after the election had happened. So we were successful and we got some people elected. But now you get to make decisions, and those decisions are going to make people unhappy sometimes. And so one of the key things you have to be prepared to do is you have to, and I've been guilty of not doing this enough, is support your folks. Support the people who you help to get elected after they're elected, because they're going to need your help, and they're not going to be able to do the things that you want them to do without outside pressure to do it. So just because the election's done doesn't mean that your job here is done. So thanks for everything that you're doing, and you've signed up in the future to do.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. Once you get elected, you still have work to do. I think for me, what I keep thinking about is how progressive can look different depending where you are. And we have to accept that it's, if you are in a suburban, you know, heavy car use, that there has to be a way to speak a progressive platform and still focus on winning, right? So I think it's important that balance to strike. And I will just leave it at that, because sometimes there's an instinct to write people off as not true progressives when they're actually running in a location where they are the most progressive on paper.
That was very carefully worded. I saw the struggle there, but I hear you. Okay, so we are at 8:12, and we're gonna try and wrap up by 8:30. So I think we're just going to jump into the questions now, because there are a lot of questions, a lot of good thoughts. And I will say one of the questions we had for the panelists was about different strategies for campaigning, the suburbs versus the outer core versus the core. And that also came up in questions. So if that was something top of mind for you, we will get to it. Maybe we'll even start there now. So there was a question from Leslie Yeah, Leslie, here in Ottawa, we need to break the urban versus suburban rural split, which development interests have been very good at exploiting. How do we persuade both sides that we're actually being used and we need to unite to fight back? So, oh, okay.
Maybe I'll jump in, but the great thing about the ward system is you don't, right? Like you don't even need to get into that because like you can have coordinated campaigns where you're building relationships with different messaging, right? And so like, you know, in the city, like the inner part, you're going to probably talk about like, you know, bike lanes and like greenways and environment. And in the rural, or like, I guess not rural, but the suburbs, like, you know, when I'm door knocking, it's the city's not taking care of the weeds. Like I remember door knocking in like one neighborhood and like one side of it, people were worried about their family members that were overdosing. Like one person had 4 overdose in 1 week. And then I go over to another part of that pole, which was in a new development. And they were all like, the city, there's too many weeds. There's like, the city's not taking care of their land and there's getting dandelions in my lawn. And that was like the level of conversations. And that doesn't mean you can't run a campaign on like progressive values to the folks that care about like their bread and butter pocketbook issues. Like, you know, affordability still matters to those folks. Accessibility, recreational programs, like a lot of those things matter a lot to suburban voters, traffic safety, a lot of those pieces, but like making sure you know your community, know your audience. And so if folks are coming in from out of that place, being able to connect with community associations, with like the school parent community groups, like all of those kind of local community groups, you can get a whole new lens for the activism. But yeah. And then to some of the points that like, you know, we've had candidates that have said the right thing, or like people kind of getting endorsed and later, you know, suck. Part of that is holding folks accountable. But I think also making sure that like, you know, we're really asking questions about values from a broad base of perspectives, because like I think you can have campaigns and people work together. So like in Regina, like, you know, we had 2 candidates run on like defunding the police, and like they work really closely with like a mechanic who the main thing he talked about and was affordability. And he's like in a more rural area, and like, you know, they second each other's motions and they get along, but they ran very different campaigns, and that's a great thing about a ward system.
Okay, yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Okay, there's also a question here about mayor versus councillor elections. And Sarah asks, do you recommend people get involved in councillor's campaign or the mayoral campaign, especially this year since we have a real chance to get a progressive mayor? So for a little bit of context, the current mayor will not be running, I was gonna say rerunning, that's not a word, will not be running this election. And we've got some really interesting candidates who have expressed interest or explicitly said they're running. Some of them super progressive, some of them part of kind of the old guard in council. And I'll throw this to anyone who feels excited about the question. For the questions, I think what we can do is we'll just jump in if they feel right to you.
I think where your heart is, like if there's a council candidate you're really excited about, or if it's the mayoral candidate. But I think that connecting in between levels of campaign is really important, and also the data sharing. So if you're staff on one of those campaigns, thinking about how you can kind of build some coordination into that, like is really important. But focus where you are, but also like if you're thinking strategically as an organization, making sure that you're shifting resources around. So being able to know that like our incumbents are safe, or this person's safe. So now we're going to shovel all of our volunteers to like, you know, an area that needs more help. Like you'll need to do that as an organization, but as individuals that are looking to get involved, like there's no place to get involved.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you're saying it's 2 things. It's one, just what your heart desires, but also the second one is strategically what makes most sense. Okay. And there's a really interesting question here about civic literacy. Most Canadians don't understand how government works, e.g. truckers. I'm not gonna say truckers, because in all fairness, this was not representative of truckers. So the folks who decided to occupy Ottawa, thinking that the federal government dictates public health measures. How do we address civic literacy? This is a big one. Who wants to take that?
I mean, for the large part of it, it's you're going to go knock on doors, or you're going to have conversations with as many people as you can about how the system works. And this is, again, it's a great question, because it's one of the barriers that prevent people from voting, is they don't understand the system that you're asking them to vote in. So having those conversations, taking the time to explain the system, how it works, who they're voting for, this is all part of, it's all part of the system. And knocking on doors is one of the most powerful ways of getting people to learn the system they're in and getting them out to the door, out to the polls. So I think it's going to be my answer to many of the questions coming up. So knock on doors.
Just knock doors. Okay. All right. So this is both a short question, but a big one, especially since all of us here, panelists, we're all in our early 20s. So this will be very familiar to us in our youth. How do you recommend targeting?
That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in so long.
We're all just barely 21, living the good life. How do you recommend targeting younger voters in the upcoming election? Now look how the youth go quiet. You're 21, folks. Come on, give us your...
I think we should ask them.
There's a solid start. Yeah.
I have a brief answer. I certainly don't know the whole answer myself, but just based on our past campaign experiences, we know that younger people tend to be on social media a lot more than, people, I don't know, 45 and older. I really don't know what the statistics are, but they do tend to be a lot more online. And so we did find that we got a lot of people engaged from those age groups through social media. And obviously there are limitations to that argument as well, because social media also just reaches a limited pool of younger people as well. So I think, having, social events could be a really good way of doing it. Marrying kind of arts and politics is a really good strategy. We've had a lot of different events that have pulled in different communities from the younger cohort that showcases arts and culture and musicians and comedians. And yeah, I think that is one successful strategy as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. And someone, go for it, Lisa.
Go, Tria.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, I find giving also young folks more control over things is great. Like asking young people how they want to get involved and what issues matter to them. And like, I know, like in my recent campaign, like our best canvassers were like a team of 15-year-olds. And so there was like 3 of them. So like when we're talking young people in the chat, like it's a lot of, like renters or like university students, but you can go younger. And like, some of those folks, like, they're just great on the doors. And a lot of the folks that got involved for me were through the climate strikes stuff. So like there's like lots of networks of like really active high school youth too. Yeah, 9-year-olds. My best door knockers were like 5 and 7. And like I've never seen anyone get so many popsicles while door knocking. And people remembered it when we went back. They're like, oh, I love those 2 kids you brought in. So yeah, like get them young, and get them involved. And I think like it can be really empowering for young folks to feel like they have some ownership over a campaign too.
That's a great point. Many moons ago, my father ran an election in Kenya, and my 9-year-old brother was his driver. Now, I'm not saying you should do this. It was in a rural area, but making the children work is good for character building. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, Tria really took it right. What I was going to say is that giving control over an agency and letting the youths have fun on the socials. But I think that there is this question of like turning that into voting. And that actually comes down to, I think, like a more of a civic education piece in the school system. Not that like young people want to listen to teachers telling them what to do. But yeah, if you can get in through like student groups, through clubs in high schools, like finding, one of your, get a kid who's like 11 or 12 to like, gather their friends and talk about voting and stuff like that is much more, I think, powerful than trying to put like just being like on social media. Through community groups. That's
Mm.
my answer.
Yeah,
And
so- Oh,
I
go ahead.
don't know if you guys have money to do paid canvassers, but like a lot of young folks,
Yeah.
like paid canvassing is like one of the first things they get involved with politically. And I remember when I think one of my first paid political jobs was door knocking in Vancouver for a municipal election, and like came in to do E-Day.
Hmm.
And
And it
volunteer
was great.
hours. Volunteer hours too. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot there in making things mutually beneficial, but also giving youth a lot of autonomy. Now we're almost at time, and I'm looking, we've got quite a few more questions here. For the sake of just going in the order that they came in, maybe we'll finish off with a question that I think is really interesting, especially if we're talking about door knocking, phone calls, all of that, and elections getting really busy. How do you balance campaigning and ensuring individuals vote with not wanting to overwhelm or annoy potential voters? This is when everyone clicks leave meeting. The panelists are like, I don't know, I'm sorry, best of luck.
So I'll start by echoing some of the comments made earlier about make sure you have good data. So, you know, in municipal elections in Victoria are different than federal provincial. Like in a federal provincial election, I will know when somebody's voted because the Elections Canada or BC will tell me. In a municipal level, you don't know that. So when I go to the door, I talk to somebody and say, great, I've marked down you're going to support my candidate. I'm going to come back and talk to you on E-Day. Well, on E-Day, when I go to you and I talk to you, I'm asking if you voted. And if you say no, I'm going to come back 2 or 3 or 4 more times until you voted. And the important part here is that making sure you've got that good data collection. So when they say I voted, I don't go back again. And then furthermore, like if you're at the door and somebody says, hey, I'll support your people, but never come talk to me again, take them at their face value. It's not worth your time going to annoy somebody if they say they're going to support your people. Unless they don't mention it, then do go back in E-Day 2 or 3 or 4 more times until they vote. I don't think I've ever lost votes for going back too many times. So it's more worthwhile to annoy people into voting than it is to lose out on votes by not going back and talking to them.
Okay, Lisa, I'm assuming that's what you were going to come in with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're going to annoy people. It's the nature of the game.
Okay. It's kind of
Go
getting
vote.
okay. All right. You know what? There's one important question here that's come up, and Ty just put it up. How do you raise money? So I cannot, in good conscience, close this conversation without asking you folks about money. Any thoughts? And I'm gonna I know we're at 8:25, folks. Danica's gonna close us off in a few minutes. Stay with us because we're talking about money, and hopefully all the panelists can touch on this one because I'm sure it's looked different for each of you. How do you raise money?
Well, the first thing is making sure you ask. So I've noticed Horizon's been really great at like putting in the plugs for donations, and that's really great. But like having events, not being afraid to ask. And I think there's probably specific things because not everyone's going to be who's on this chat is going to be managing campaigns. So I think fundraising is like one of the big things that we train folks on that are candidates and campaign managers. But yeah, the most important thing is not being afraid to ask for both money and for time.
That's fair. That's fair. Cara, any thoughts? Oh, Lisa, you've got yourself muted. So we'll go Lisa, Cara, James.
I'll pass for the time being.
Yeah, definitely fundraising is really important. I completely echo what Tria was saying about not being afraid to ask. I think sometimes people get quite shy around asking, including me. I remember we had like a fundraising phoning night and we were supposed to call, 10 of our, affluent friends or 10 of our friends and ask them for money. And even then, because of that personal relationship, I felt very shy about it. So I do think that just foregrounding the message around why supporting your organization or your cause is so important is key to asking for the money. But people, like if you do have the proper messaging, people will definitely donate. And I can speak from just personal experience with my organization, where we've hit all of our fundraising targets during these last several months. And once you have a message, people tend to give, and they tend to be very generous about it. And one effective way that we managed to fundraise was last Valentine's Day, we had a dumpling date night. And we invited a local chef to teach us how to make dumplings. And then it became also a way for our electeds, our school board trustee and our counselor to talk about local politics. And that was, that was a huge seller, and we raised a ton of money. And at the very end, we had a fundraising pitch. Don't forget your fundraising pitch. You can raise money with tickets, but at the very end, to get someone super dynamic, we got Avi Lewis to come and make the fundraising pitch. And people just gave and gave and gave. And I think we raised $12,000 during that event. So yeah.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Go ahead, Lisa.
Memorize your rebate codes. That is a big one. It's just like know them on hand, because people will like, that's a huge sell. I assume Ottawa has rebate codes. Percentage of money that folks get back. Yeah, no, okay.
I will find out.
And like, not to be crass, but like identify the affluent people in your life. They know affluent people, so allow them to, give them a, like, I need you to raise $1,000 for me. I need you to raise $10,000 for me. It will make a difference. Your contribution will make a difference. Like, I think that's a huge strategy. That's really important. And yeah, like social pressure. Social pressure, social proof. I remember events where it's like, who here can give $100? And people raise their hands, and it's like, no one else, no one else. Yeah, I tend to be a bit bold when it comes to fundraising.
I mean, hey, if it works, it works. And we've got from the chat here that Ottawa does have rebates.
Yeah.
So that is answered. James, anything to finish this conversation?
I've never been so jealous about Ontario. You have rebates? You don't have any. Yeah, so I mean, one of the best successes we had was a public fundraiser. We had it like kind of like a GoFundMe online. It was great. We raised a whole bunch of money out of it. But I agree, social pressure is a great tool. A sense of urgency. People will say, hey, listen, like we're one of our best fundraising days was when we pointed out that like we're not winning the sign war, and we need money to help win the sign war. And instantly we got a whole flood of cash. But the one thing that folks kind of feel icky about is that the group that's most likely to donate to you is the group that's already donated to you. So if somebody donates $20 to you now, don't be afraid to go back in 6 months and ask them for another $20. They're already invested in you. They already think you're good. You don't need to convince them of that. So don't be afraid to go back and ask again if you need to. Okay. And then importantly, if you can't donate, your time is just as valuable, if not more. So the campaigns will always need your time. And this is a great time to say that, hey, if you haven't donated to Horizon Ottawa, you should probably click the link in the chat and go donate now.
And can folks donate from out of province? Or do you guys have like electoral spending rules? Like,
I really hope you're not asking me that, Tria, but I hope someone else will be able to come in the chat with that answer.
Only in province, boo.
Oh, there we go. On that note, there's a lot more questions, a lot of great conversation in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Tria, you have a lot of proxies though.
It's true. Cut the mic.
I think like people could probably from out of province donate to Horizon, but not to individual candidates. But like, yeah, milk your contacts from anywhere.
Okay.
And sometimes if people can't donate, they can buy swag or things like that, or like tickets to events. So that's something like I might not be able to go, but I could probably buy 2 tickets to a fundraiser. So yeah, there's lots of stuff. And I know we're ending, but just like if anyone wants to chat more, I think all of us are very keen on supporting and making sure you guys have a kick-ass municipal election. So I'm really excited to see everything you do. And if there's anything I can help with, and I assume other people too, our socials are on there.
Tria has volunteered all of you, so voluntold. So I was going to say, you know, so much conversation in the chat, so many great questions that remain unanswered. So don't let it end here. Go to Twitter. You have everyone's handle, Horizon Ottawa, and a puppy to help you soothe into the night. Thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to give it over to Danica. Thank you for being patient. You know, DJ Sharon with the hot tracks is going to sign off now. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. Let's make a good election. Let's do some big things this year.